Scientists are warning about the increasing dangers of human encroachment on natural habitats for bats. Experts say that expanding the search for resources in areas where bats are heavily populated increases the risk of pathogen transmission to humans, which can fuel future pandemics. Ryan McNeill joins us now from London. He's the deputy editor of data journalism with Reuters. So I don't want to malign bats because...
Yeah, I know. And I felt that we were sort of doing that in our teases, right? Because the truth of the matter is the reason that we are physically closer to bats is because we are helping to destroy their environment, either sort of physically or because of climate change. That's what we're getting into.
Bats are an incredible species that, serve their use in nature. But Anne-Marie is right. We are deforesting the planet at a high rate. So explain to our audience what regions are considered to be highest risk for bat-borne diseases that transmit to humans as we continue to encroach on their habitat.
Hi. Well, my colleagues and I found that this is fundamentally a story about the battle between the global economic system and nature, and the global economic system is winning. And in doing so, by our calculations, more than 1 billion people are at risk. And in our reporting, we focused on several areas. One of those was West Africa, where my colleague Helen Reid visited Ghana and Liberia, where mining for gold and iron ore and other metals is helping drive tree loss and put us into closer proximity with bats. My colleague Deb Nilsson visited Kerala in southwest India, where a deadly disease called Nipah has emerged for the first time. And then, of course, there's Southeast Asia, including Xishuangbanna in China and Laos, where scientists have found the closest links to SARS-CoV-2. And in South America, we visited the Amazon, where massive deforestation is to make room for things like livestock production has created more high-risk areas than anywhere else in the world. And scientists fear about that region what we don't know, and that the next pandemic could emerge there.
So I'm not a biologist, so anyone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think part of the concern is that bats are mammals, and so just like we are, and so as a result, there are viruses that can more easily be transmitted to us because they're mammals, but also they're flying mammals. So they can move into vaster areas in a way that other mammals may not be able to. How have conditions in these high-risk areas, though, changed over the years to increase the chances of diseases being transmitted to humans? Because, most of us don't really encounter bats to the point where they could transmit a disease to us.
Well, a couple of examples. In Kerala, you could point toward development. It's a tropical area where extensive tree loss and rapid urbanization has created, sort of ideal conditions. And my colleague Deb Nelson visited the home of Muhammad Sabith, who contracted Nipah in 2018. And when you look at the satellite imagery around where he lived, you can see the changes over time, that this is this sort of forested area where over the last 2 decades, homes have started to emerge, and you see little chunks of trees go missing, this habitat disruption that we talk about, to make room for quarries or to make room for fruit trees. Over in the Amazon, under far-right populist President Jair Bolsonaro, tree loss across the Amazon skyrocketed. So that was a matter of public policy. So, those are two key reasons, 2 key places where you can sort of point to some recent changes.
Yeah, and to that point, we're talking about the threat that bat poses to humans in terms of disease, but in fact, bat population around the world is declining for the very reasons that you mentioned, which means it puts this very delicate ecosystem at risk, particularly, for example, in the Amazon, where bats are responsible for pest control. They actually spread pollen. Removing bats from the equation could throw off the ecosystem.
It's not good for us either.
No, exactly. So the question then becomes, what regions are expected to become hot zones for bat to human disease as And what can governments do? I think ultimately, at the end of the day, if governments decide that there are parts of their habitat and region that should not be encroached on, we can do away with this issue. But it's lax government control, allowing people to move into these areas where these bats are naturally occurring.
Well, let me give you an example. I mean, this doesn't mean that we have to stop development. But if you take Laos, for example, it's one of the most forested countries on Earth. And there's been, over the last 2 decades, there's been massive tree growth. We focused on the northern part of the country where trees have been felled to make sort of way for rubber plantations and other agricultural products destined for China. Now, just here recently, a new high-speed rail line, the first one in Laos, which was built and financed by China, has opened, and its job is to speed goods and people to and from China. And so you could kind of point to that as an example and say, scientists, in many countries we have to, many countries require projects, large projects, to have environmental impact assessments. And so scientists say, on an example like this train line, if you were to do, the equivalent for biological risk, for viral risk, you can make adaptations. If you understand the risk before the project is built, you can mitigate some of those risks by, making different planning decisions. So it's not about stopping development at all. It's about understanding the risk and taking steps to alleviate those.
Right.
And the other thing, honestly, is we're just scratching the surface on what we know about bats and their role in viral transmission. And a lot of money and funding is needed for scientific research, for surveillance, for various understanding bat behavior, why they do the things that they do.
Ryan,
so you might say that's expensive, but how expensive was COVID?
Exactly.
Yes.
It's expensive, but the cost is too high, if you will. Ryan McNeill, thank you very much.